Hi everyone, welcome to this short presentation on media training and professionalism for today's athlete. My name is Charles Parkinson. There'll be 4 parts to this session. The first is understanding the communication process. The more you know about communication, the better you can be at it. Understanding the media. A little knowledge in this area can help you become much more effective. 3, tips and techniques for dealing with the media, particularly in interview situations. And finally, I'll conclude with some finishing remarks. Athletes spend years learning the basic skills of their sport. I was a carded athlete back in the late 70s and early 80s and lived in our full-time training center for 4 years. During that time, I spent 5 hours a day, 6 days a week training for my sport, and a grand total of 0 hours learning to speak to or deal with the media. Needless to say, when I was in an interview situation, I had no idea what I was doing. Having now broadcast 4 Olympic Games as well as World Championships, Pan Am Games, World Cups, and the World League, I've interviewed a number of athletes and coaches. And with Rio on the horizon, I wanted to present this crash course on what's going on when you're engaged in a conversation and how you can be effective in front of the media. The communication process seems quite simple. It starts with a sender, a message, and a receiver. But the more you know about it, the more complex it actually is. So what happens is when you have a message, you encode it. So you turn that message into symbols that can be communicated. And typically these are written or spoken words, but for example, it could also be a picture. It's pretty clear what this picture is saying. Once the message is encoded, you get it ready to transmit. Now, if you're dealing face-to-face with someone, this is as far as you need to go. However, if you're not face-to-face, the selection of the medium is quite important. Today, there are so many ways in which to transmit a message: print, radio, television, digital, and they're increasing all the time. When you have selected your medium, now you're ready to actually transmit the message to the receiver. Now what the receiver has to do is to decode that message into terms that they can understand. Once they've done that, you get feedback, and the feedback comes in the way of action. Either the outcome that you're looking for is realized, or you need to modify or reformulate or abandon that message in favor of another one. So it's actually quite a complicated process, as you can see, and it happens in a very, very short time frame. So communication can break down anywhere in the process. You may think you've encoded your message perfectly, but then you get a weird response or some strange feedback because you didn't actually say what you think you thought you said. There may be some form of blockage or interference that prevents transmission or only allows some of the message to get through. Now, the trouble with only getting part of the message through is that we as receivers immediately fill in the blanks. It's the way our minds are wired. We interpret all the time. We interpret words, body language, clothing, smells. They all mean something to us. And if a message is incomplete, we finish it. And we react accordingly, even if we are very, very wrong. As if the communication process is not complicated enough, there are a number of other things that have an impact on communicating. Emotion and mood are heavy influencers. If you're angry or happy or sad or preoccupied, those are going to elicit different communication responses. If you're trying to respond while receiving, if you're biased, if you have angry feelings towards the sender, It goes as far as, for example, some people had convinced themselves they can't operate in the morning until they've had their coffee. So you can't really ask them a question because they're not in a mood to answer until they've had that caffeine. Physical condition also affects communication. You could be fatigued, in pain, you could be sick, it could be noisy, you could be too hot or too cold. Body language is another big effector. Visual, vocal, and verbal responses are what we react to. There could be environmental issues, noise, crowds, weather, discomfort, where the message is received, how distracted you are. There could also be technical issues. This could be electrical, mechanical, or physical failures that interfere with or interrupt the transmission. Again, this could be laryngitis. It could be printing problems or dropped calls. It could be storms, an internet crash, digital interference. There are many things that affect our ability to communicate. And finally, there's a big one called stress. We've all been in those situations where our heart rate increases, our brain function tends to decrease because we are very, very stressed. Intense training or competition can have a significant impact on any of these factors, and the way in which we communicate can be compromised. So I thought I'd share with you a few humorous, stress-induced comments that were unfortunately captured on national television. And these are some athlete commentators who were in situations that elicited responses that they wouldn't normally give. A few more here. And the point is, it doesn't matter what sport it is, because communication is not selective, and neither is stress. We've all been in situations where we've been stressed, or we've said or done something strange or really out of character as a result. But a little knowledge of communications is a great thing. Why? Because it can help you send clearer messages. It can prevent misunderstanding or ambiguity because you will encode your message correctly. It can lend you credibility and help you to develop more and often deeper relationships. And of course, it can help you in your interaction with the media. So, armed with this information about communication, try to think of the media as a gateway. It's a gateway to industry stakeholders. Could be other teams, clubs, franchises. To your colleagues, to sponsors. This is a really big one for amateur sport athletes that are looking for support. To fans. It can help you get your message out. And of course, whether you're interested in fame or notoriety, the way in which you communicate can impact that considerably. But there's something to remember in all of this. That reporters work in a competitive environment. Reduced column inches, time constraints, decisions made by editors, directors, and producers, these all determine what stays in or gets cut from a story. TV reporters get assignments in the morning to produce news stories for the evening. With newspapers, it may be the next day, but either way, it means that reporters have little time to research stories, interview sources, and to write. So, time is of the essence. Media personnel need and are always on the lookout for information and stories that are both interesting and newsworthy and fit the target market of their particular media's consumers. The number of platforms has increased considerably. Just think of cell phones, blogs, websites, the proliferation of media outlets, web versions of outlets, online reviews, chat rooms. These have all become as important and in some cases even as credible as the more traditional types of media. Most reporters are looking for you to be successful rather than trying to trip you up. Stories are not investigations. So how do you deal with the media? There's one technique that I'd like to share with you, which is perhaps the most important technique for athletes to master. It can get you from where you don't want to go to where you do want to go. And when appropriate, it allows you to speak about your message rather than address a question that really may have no positive outcome for you. Politicians are very good at bridging when they're asked questions by reporters that they don't really want to address. And it's actually amazingly simple. So when you're asked a difficult question or a question that you don't want to really address, you can provide a brief response like yes, actually, on the contrary, in fact, and then use a bridge to get into a key message or a message that you really want to get across. On the contrary, what I can tell you is, or on the contrary, what's really important, or actually, I'm not sure of that, but what I can say, and so you use this response, or it's a brief answer, and then a bridge, and then you can move into the type of response that you want to give, and that can either be a key message or something that's important to you. Now you might ask, well, what situations am I going to be in when I don't want to answer a question? So I've given you a few here to take a look at. So thinking ahead to the decriminalization of marijuana that's coming, perhaps you're going to be asked, what do you think about this, and should it be eliminated from athlete drug testing? Is this a question that you really want to answer? It could be around terrorist violence. How can organizers or Canadian officials maintain your safety? You're not an expert in this area. This is not something you want to address. And finally, particularly with Rio on the horizon, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the whatever the event. Do you think it should have been moved from whatever venue, country, whatever? Again, I'm not sure that these are questions that have a positive impact for you. So you maybe want to look at this and bridge into something that you want to talk about relative to your sport or your training for the event. So here's a few more tips for dealing with the media. Before agreeing to do an interview, it's important to note that the discussion is what the discussion is going to be about. There are some things you may not want to discuss publicly, or a reporter may just be looking for a quote to validate a conclusion that they've already come to, but which you may not share. The ability to speak in sound bites is a great skill, and it takes a bit of time to master this. You can practice in front of a mirror. The main point is to remember to keep your answers short and quotable. 9 to 15 seconds is a pretty good rule of thumb here. Now, the next is that we tend to dislike extended periods of silence in conversations because it makes us feel a little bit uncomfortable. As a result, we have a tendency to just start talking. So you need to resist the temptation to fill the air. So when you're asked a difficult question, take a brief moment to consider your response. And think of it in these terms: single thought, pause, single thought. If you take a few seconds to gather yourself, it makes you appear thoughtful. And it also gives you a chance to think of your answer. Use this silence to your advantage. Don't be afraid of it. Also, be yourself in an interview. You love what you do, and that should show when you're speaking about it. People with energy are magnetic. Don't forget why you are giving the interview. You've got something to say, a story to tell, or a message to get out. Stay true to that approach. And remember, you're an expert. You've forgotten more about your sport than most people are ever going to know. So keep your answers simple and understandable. And if you aren't really sure, bridge out of the question. So for example, you're asked a difficult question, you can just simply say, well, I'm not an expert in that area, but what I can tell you is, and then you're off onto whatever that key message is for you. Stay professional. Speaking off the record can be dangerous, especially if you're voicing a personal opinion. Now, while most media are good when you agree to an off-the-record discussion, you just never know. Always take the high road and don't say what you wouldn't want quoted in a media story. Remember, contrary to some people's perceptions, most interviews are not investigative in nature. Reporters are trained to gather news quickly and accurately by conducting interviews about experts, or from sources like you. In most cases, it's about understanding you, an issue, an outcome, a ruling, an incident. What the reporters try to do is gather the facts in an objective and balanced way and present stories that people will be interested in listening to or hearing about. If they don't do this, they won't survive in their industry. In conclusion, when you talk to most TV media, they get butterflies every time they go on camera, no matter how long they've been in the business, much the same as athletes do before they compete. Like you, they use this to inspire a great performance, and you can too. Take the time to prepare a few key messages that you can always use. Take your time when answering. Make sure you know what the interview's about, and switch on your brain before you engage your tongue. Let your personality shine through. Thanks for listening, everyone. I hope you found this a little bit useful, and I want to wish you the best of luck. And if you'd like to provide feedback at any time or send me an email, you can do so at the email address listed. This is Charles Parkinson saying bye for now.